The morning after my hip surgery, my son walked into my hospital room and demanded I sign over control of my finances. When I refused, he grabbed my hand and snapped, "You don't get to decide anymore." "I do." I fought back, and seconds later he broke my wrist while forcing the papers toward me. He thought I was too weak to fight back, but he didn't know the hospital camera had captured every second of what he did. I'm truly grateful to have you here on Dad's Revenge Stories. Tell me, which city or country are you watching from today? Also, please note, this narrative contains fictionalized details created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message itself is worth holding on to. The morning after my hip replacement surgery, the room smelled like antiseptic recycled air and the ghost of bad cafeteria coffee. I had spent most of the night learning how to breathe without my right side screaming at me, and by the time the morning nurse came in to check my vitals, I had almost convinced myself the worst was behind me. I was wrong. My name is William Carter. I am 72 years old. I spent 40 years building a construction company with my own two hands, poured concrete, in the summer heat, negotiated contracts, in boardrooms I had no business being in, and eventually sold Carter Construction in 2019 for more money than my father ever dreamed existed. I retired quietly, moved into a smaller house on the east side of Charlotte, and told myself the hard part of life was finished. Ethan walked through the door of room 214 at Mercy General Hospital at 9:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just looked at the clock on the wall, counting the minutes until the physical therapist was supposed to arrive. My son was 43 years old, dressed in a navy suit that cost more than my first truck, and he was carrying a leather portfolio tucked under his arm like a weapon he hadn't drawn yet. "Dad." He pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed and sat down without being invited. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone replaced my hip with a socket wrench," I said. "But I'm breathing. How are you?" He didn't answer the question. His eyes moved just briefly to the monitor beside my bed, scanning the numbers the way a man checks a bank balance. Then he looked back at me and smiled, and something about that smile made the hair on my arms stand up. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. "The surgery went well, they told me. Clean procedure." "They told you?" "I called the nursing station yesterday." He set the portfolio on his knee and drummed his fingers against the leather. I wanted to make sure everything was handled correctly. I watched him. Ethan had his mother's jaw and my stubbornness, and right now both of those things were pointed directly at me with an energy that had nothing to do with concern. His tie was slightly crooked. There were shadows under his eyes deep enough to plant seeds in. His right knee was bouncing slowly, rhythmically, in the way it had bounced since he was 8 years old, and wanted something he knew he wasn't supposed to ask for. "Ethan," I said. "What do you need?" He stopped bouncing his knee. A short exhale left his mouth, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "Is it that obvious?" "Son, I've known you for 43 years. You've never visited me at 9 in the morning on a weekday unless something was on fire." He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. When he spoke again, the rehearsed smoothness in his voice cracked just enough for me to hear the panic underneath it. "The company is in trouble, Dad. Real trouble. I've got 3 contractors threatening to pull out of the Uptown project because I missed 2 payment cycles. The bank is holding my line of credit. I've got payroll due on Friday, and I don't have the liquidity to cover it." He pressed his palms together like a man in prayer. "I need $400,000 from the recovery fund." The recovery fund. That was what he called it casually, like it was a shared account, like the $200,000 I had set aside specifically to cover my surgery. Rehabilitation and post-operative care was a community resource he had a claim on. "Ethan." My voice came out quieter than I intended. That money is for my medical expenses. I know what it's for, he said quickly. But you have other savings. The trust, the property, Dad, you have more than enough. This is just a bridge loan. I'll pay it back within 18 months, I swear. I just need to get through this quarter. I looked at my son. I looked at the shadows under his eyes and the crooked tie and the portfolio on his knee. And I thought about every other time he had sat across from me with that same expression at 26, when he needed startup capital at 31, when the first company folded at 38, when he swore this new venture was the one that would finally work. Each time I had said yes. Each time he had promised to pay it back. Each time the money had disappeared into whatever crater his ambition had dug for itself, and we had never spoken of it again. I breathed in slowly, feeling the tight pull of the surgical dressing across my hip. No, I said. The word was small. One syllable. I had said it 10,000 times in my life to contractors, to bankers, to city inspectors who wanted things they weren't entitled to. But I had never once said it to Ethan. Not like this. Not with full weight behind it. Not meaning it the way I meant it now. Ethan blinked. His face didn't collapse. It went very still, the way a surface goes still right before something beneath it shifts. Dad. No, I said again. That money keeps me out of a substandard recovery facility. It pays for the physical therapist and the follow-up imaging and the medication. It is not a bridge loan. It is not a family account. It is mine. He stood up from the chair slowly. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger, not yet. It was colder than anger. It was calculation. I thought you'd say that, he said, and his voice had dropped into a register I hadn't heard before. Flat. Even. Like a man reading a prepared statement. I really hoped you wouldn't. He picked up the portfolio, tucked it back under his arm, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at me, and the expression on his face in that moment made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery. Get some rest, Dad, he said. I'll come back tomorrow. The door clicked shut behind him. I stared at the ceiling tiles, white, institutional, utterly indifferent, and listened to the steady beep of the monitor and the distant sounds of the hospital floor carrying on around me. My sister Linda had gone to the cafeteria 20 minutes ago to get coffee. She would be back soon, and I would have to decide how much to tell her. I replayed the look on Ethan's face when I said no. Not the shock, not the hurt, the calculation. He hadn't been surprised. He had been measuring something, and whatever he had measured, whatever conclusion he had reached, standing in that doorway with his portfolio under his arm, it had not discouraged him. It had rearranged him. I pressed the call button for the nurse, not because I needed anything, but because I suddenly didn't want to be alone in a room with a door that didn't lock. Linda came back from the cafeteria with 2 cups of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, a bag of peanut butter crackers she knew I didn't like, and the particular expression on her face that meant she had been sitting alone long enough to start worrying. She was 65 years old, my sister 5 years younger than me, 3 inches shorter, and possessed of the kind of sharp intuition that had made her invaluable as a bookkeeper for 30 years and occasionally insufferable as a sibling for 65. She set the coffee on the bedside table, looked at my face, and immediately pulled the chair close to the bed. "He was here," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because you look like someone ran over your dog and then asked you to sign the insurance paperwork." She folded her hands in her lap and waited. I picked up the coffee. It was terrible thin and over-roasted, the kind that comes out of a machine that gets cleaned twice a year, whether it needs it or not. I drank it anyway, because my hands needed something to do. He wants $400,000, I said. From the recovery fund. Claims the company is about to go under. Linda made a sound in the back of her throat, not quite a word, not quite a sigh. Something that carried 40 years of restraint in it. What did you tell him? I told him no. I set the cup down. He didn't like it. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, the careful neutrality she had maintained for years, cracking just slightly at the edges. William, she said, this is the third time in 5 years he's come to you with a crisis. The loans before this, how much total? I didn't answer right away. Outside the window, I could see the hospital parking lot 4 stories below, and in one corner, a silver Mercedes pulling out of the visitors section and disappearing into the afternoon traffic. Ethan always drove silver. He said it looked professional. His mother used to say it made him look like a banker. I used to think that was a compliment. Enough, I said finally. More than enough. Linda leaned forward. William, how much? I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the stiffness that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Over the years, close to 600,000, spread out. Different amounts, different reasons. A bridge loan when the first company restructured. Capital for the new venture. Equipment purchases I co-signed for. I exhaled slowly. He always paid back enough to make it seem like a relationship instead of a drain. Linda closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, the look on her face hit me somewhere below the ribs. Do you remember when he was 12? She said. And he broke the neighbor's front window with a baseball, and you made him mow their lawn all summer to pay it back. I remember. He was furious at you for 3 weeks. Wouldn't eat dinner at the table. A faint, sad smile crossed her face. But he did it. He showed up every Saturday morning with that old mower, and by August he was actually proud of himself. She paused. That was the last time I saw him finish something he started that wasn't funded by someone else's money. The words landed quietly, but they landed hard. I thought about Ethan at 12, red-faced and indignant, pushing that rusted mower across the neighbor's lawn in the August heat. I thought about Ethan at 26, walking into my office with a business plan printed on glossy paper and a handshake full of certainty. I thought about Ethan this morning in his navy suit, with his crooked tie, his knee bouncing with barely contained desperation. Somewhere between that 12-year-old with the mower and the 43-year-old with the portfolio, I had stopped making him finish things himself. Linda, my voice came out rough. When did I stop being his father and start being his bank? She didn't look away. Her eyes were wet at the corners, not from tears she was going to let fall, but from the kind of grief that lives just underneath the surface and surfaces only when you're not careful. I don't know exactly, she said quietly, but I know it wasn't all your fault. You were working. You were always working. You trusted that things at home were being handled. I looked at her sharply. What does that mean? She hesitated, the kind of hesitation that comes from deciding whether to say something she's been holding for a long time. Then she reached into her handbag and took out her phone. She scrolled for a moment and turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot of a bank wire transfer confirmation. The amount was $62,000. The destination account was flagged with a name I didn't recognize. The sending account was one I recognized immediately, a joint account I had shared with my late wife, Margaret, closed out 2 years before she passed. Where did you get this? I asked. My voice came out lower than I intended. From Margaret's files, Linda said. She kept meticulous records, William, you know that. After she died, I went through her papers to help settle the estate, and I found... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I found records of transfers I don't think you knew about. not to household accounts, to Ethan, going back 8 years before she passed. The room seemed to contract around me. I stared at the screenshot until the numbers blurred. Margaret, my wife of 38 years. The woman who clipped coupons and kept the household ledger in a green binder she updated every Sunday. The woman who told me we needed to be careful, that we needed to plan for the future, that we couldn't keep bailing Ethan out every time he stumbled. The woman who had apparently been bailing Ethan out herself quietly behind the ledger she showed me, and inside the one she didn't. How much? I asked. So that I could document. Linda lowered the phone. A little over 300,000 across 11 years. But William, she reached out and put her hand over mine. Her fingers were cold from the cafeteria, or maybe from the weight of what she was telling me. I don't think she did it to deceive you. I think she did it because she loved him and she was trying to protect him from the consequences of his own choices. And I think she was also trying to protect you from having to make the choice. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the surgical anesthesia still working its way out of my system. I thought about the arguments Margaret and I had never had, the ones I had assumed were settled, because Ethan always seemed to right himself eventually. I thought about how a man can work 40 years to build a foundation and never notice the cracks forming in the floor beneath him. She thought she was helping him, I said. She was, Linda said, and she was wrong, and so were you, and so was I for not telling you sooner. Her grip on my hand tightened. But William, that's not the point right now. The point is that Ethan walked in here this morning, and whatever is about to happen next, you need to know the full picture before it does. I looked at her. There's more, isn't there? It wasn't a question. I could see it in the way she held herself, the careful stillness of a person carrying something they haven't set down yet. Yes, she said. A great deal more. But I've spent 8 months building it into something that can't be dismissed, and I'm not going to hand it to you in pieces in a hospital room the night after surgery. I need you rested before you see it. And I need you to promise me something first. What? She looked me directly in the eyes. Promise me that whatever you feel when you see it, whatever anger or grief or guilt comes up, you don't let Ethan see a single second of it. Not 1 second. Can you do that? I looked at my sister, at the steady resolve in her face, and felt something shift inside me, something old and heavy that had been wedged in place for decades, beginning very slowly to move. I've been hiding things from that boy his whole life, I said. One more shouldn't be a problem. I didn't sleep well. The pain medication they gave me after the surgery had a way of pulling me under just long enough to make me feel like I was resting, then dropping me back into wakefulness with my heart running faster than it should. By 5 in the morning, I had given up entirely and lay there watching the sky outside the window shift from black to gray to the pale, indifferent blue of an October dawn. I thought about Margaret. I thought about 38 years of Sunday mornings with that green binder on the kitchen table, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, her pen moving in careful columns. I had trusted her with everything, the household accounts, the bill, schedules, the college funds, every number that lived inside our life together. And she had managed it all beautifully. She had also apparently managed a second set of books I had never been shown. I wasn't angry at her. That was the thing that surprised me most. I wanted to be angry because anger would have been clean and simple and something to hold on to. But what I actually felt was grief, a new layer of it settling on top of the grief I already carried, heavier and quieter and somehow harder to put down. I was still lying there with those thoughts when the door to room 214 opened at 8:43 in the morning. Ethan walked in wearing a different suit, charcoal gray this time, freshly pressed, and carrying the same leather portfolio he'd had yesterday. He had shaved. He had fixed the tie. He looked in every external detail like a man who had slept soundly and arrived with a reasonable plan. I knew better. "Morning, Dad." He set the portfolio on the bedside table and pulled the chair close, the same position, as if he'd mentally reserved it. "How did you sleep?" "Like a man with a new hip and a lot on his mind," I said. "You... fine." He smiled and it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I think I came at it wrong. I was stressed and I pushed too hard, and I'm sorry for that." I looked at my son and waited. 40 years in the construction business taught me that when someone opens an apology, there's always a load-bearing wall behind it. Ethan reached into the portfolio and removed a document thick, maybe 15 pages, held together with a binder clip. He set it on the blanket over my lap with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something fragile. "I want to propose something different," he said. "Not a loan, something cleaner. This is a durable power of attorney. It gives me legal authority to manage your financial affairs on your behalf while you're recovering." He tapped the cover page. "It's standard language. Protects you. Lets me handle the accounts so you don't have to worry about bills or transfers while you're focused on getting better. A durable power of attorney. A legal document that, if signed, would give Ethan the right to act as me in every financial matter. Access every account. Move every dollar. Make decisions I would never see coming until they were already made. Standard language," he called it. I picked up the document and turned to the second page, then the 5th, then the 12th. My reading glasses were on the nightstand, and I put them on slowly, deliberately, because I wanted him to watch me read every word. The language was not standard. The scope was total. It covered bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and the authority to restructure or liquidate assets as the agent, meaning Ethan, deemed necessary for my well-being. My well-being. "Who drafted this?" I asked, keeping my voice conversational. "An attorney I work with, highly qualified. Not Daniel Brooks." He shifted in the chair. "No, Daniel's your guy. I wanted someone objective. Objective." I set the document down on my lap and looked at my son. "Ethan, who drafted the power of attorney for the Henderson estate back in 2011, the one that got contested because it was too broad, and the family spent 2 years in probate court sorting it out." He blinked. "I don't... Henderson Construction. They were one of my subcontractors. The father signed a document almost identical to this one because his son told him it was standard language." I tapped the cover page the same way he had. It was not standard language. It was a financial blank check with his name on the signature line. Ethan's jaw tightened. The careful friendliness in his face developed a hairline crack. "Dad, this is completely different. I'm not signing this, Ethan." I closed the document and pushed it back across the blanket toward him. "Not today. Not tomorrow. Not while I'm in this bed or when I'm out of it. This paper does not protect me. It replaces me." He stood up. The chair scraped back, and he gripped the portfolio with both hands, his knuckles whitening against the leather. The hairline crack widened into something I could see clearly, now not anger, but the raw, cornered energy of a man whose backup plan had just failed. "You are making this so much harder than it needs to be," he said, and his voice had shed every layer of rehearsed calm. "I am trying to help you. I am trying to keep this family from falling apart while you recover. And you are sitting there treating me like I'm the enemy. I'm treating you like someone who brought a 15-page legal document to his father's hospital room the morning after being told no," I said. Because that's what you are right now. His chest heaved once. He picked up the document and shoved it back into the portfolio with a force that bent the cover page. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and for one unguarded second, I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. Not malice, not greed. Something closer to desperation so complete it had gone past fear and arrived somewhere colder on the other side. "I'll come back, Dad," he said. His voice had gone flat and quiet. I really hoped it wouldn't come to this. He walked out. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut with the soft, deliberate precision of a man who had decided something. I sat with the document's ghost on my lap and thought about that phrase the second time he'd said it in 2 days. I really hoped it wouldn't come to this. Most people say that when they're backing down. My son said it like a man reading the next item on a checklist. I reached for my phone and typed a single message to Daniel Brooks. "Call me when you can. It's urgent." Then I put the phone on my chest, felt my heart beating steadily against it, and waited. Daniel called me back at 11:45 that morning. We talked for 20 minutes, me keeping my voice low and steady, him asking the kind of precise, unhurried questions that reminded me why I'd kept him as my attorney for over 2 decades. When we hung up, I felt fractionally better. Not safe, but less alone. The physical therapist came at 1 o'clock and spent 30 minutes walking me up and down the hallway in slow, grinding increments, my hip protesting every step like a hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. By the time I was back in bed, I was exhausted in the clean, honest way of a body that has been asked to do real work, and I thought foolishly, briefly, that the worst of the day was behind me. The door opened at 2:15. Ethan didn't knock. He came in fast, the way a man comes in when he's finished negotiating with himself. The portfolio was gone. He wasn't carrying anything. His charcoal jacket was off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and there was a quality to his energy that I had never seen in him before. Something stripped down and jagged like a wire with the insulation burned away. "We need to finish this conversation," he said. "Ethan." I kept my voice level. "I've said everything I have to say. You haven't heard what I have to say." He moved to the foot of the bed and gripped the metal rail with both hands. His knuckles were white against the chrome. "You want to know what's really happening? The bank called in my line of credit last Thursday. $340,000 due in full within 30 days. I've got a payroll of 60 employees I can't make. I've got a supplier threatening to put a lien on every active job site I have." His voice cracked at the edges, not with sadness but with the high, taut vibration of a man at the absolute limit of what he can hold together. "If I go under, Dad, I don't just lose the company. I lose everything. The house, my credit. Everything I've spent 20 years building." My chest ached for him. That was the terrible, complicated truth, even knowing what I knew, even carrying everything Linda had shown me the night before. Some part of me still ached for the boy who had sat on my lap in the cab of my first pickup truck and told me he wanted to build things too. "Ethan," I said carefully, "I hear you. I understand the pressure you're under. But the answer is still no. That money keeps me functioning. I will not sign over what I need to survive so that you can avoid the consequences of choices I had no part in making." Something moved through his face like weather. He came around the side of the bed, not slowly, not with warning. He snatched the power of attorney document from inside his jacket, where he'd folded it, and dropped it on my lap. "I sign it," he said. "Please, I am begging you." "No." "Dad." I said no, Ethan. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. He grabbed my right wrist, the hand nearest the document, and yanked it toward the signature line. I pulled back instinctively. He pulled harder. My shoulder torqued against the mattress, and I heard myself grunt with the pain of it, and then in the struggle and the twist of it, there was a sound. A crack, sharp and wrong and unmistakable. White fire shot from my wrist, up through my elbow to my shoulder. The kind of pain that doesn't arrive gradually, it detonates. I gasped, my whole body folding toward the injury on pure animal reflex, and the document fluttered off the bed and landed on the floor between us. Ethan let go. He stepped back and stared at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. His breathing was audible from across the room, ragged, disbelieving. "Dad, that wasn't—" I couldn't answer him. I was clenching my jaw so hard my back teeth ached, pressing my left hand over my right wrist, and focusing on the single task of not making a sound that would bring the entire floor running. Not because I wanted to protect Ethan, because I needed to think, and I needed 3 seconds to do it, and crying out would not give me 3 seconds. The door opened. Sarah Mitchell, my day nurse, 35 years old, efficient and steady in the way of someone who had been through worse than this on a Tuesday, stepped in with a medication tray and stopped dead when she saw us. "Mr. Carter." Her eyes went to my wrist, to my face, to Ethan standing at the foot of the bed. What happened? Before I could say a single word, Ethan moved. He turned to Sarah with his face rearranged into something extraordinary. Grief shock, the wide eyes of a son who had just walked in on a catastrophe. "I don't know," he said, and his voice broke convincingly on the second word. "I just got here and he was already in pain. He was trying to reach something on the nightstand. I'm not sure what happened. Where were you? Why wasn't someone in the room with him?" Sarah's expression shifted from concern to confusion, to a defensive bewilderment she was too professional to fully show. "I stepped out 2 minutes ago to get his 2 o'clock medication." 2 minutes. Ethan's voice hardened with practiced outrage. "He's a post-surgical patient. He shouldn't be alone for 2 minutes. I want to speak with your supervisor." I looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at me. Her eyes asked a question she couldn't say out loud in front of him, and I gave her the only answer I could manage right then, a very slight shake of my head. "Not now. Not yet." She set the medication tray down and reached for my wrist with careful, professional hands. I let her. The pain was extraordinary, a throbbing, insistent signal that something structural had given way, and it took everything I had to keep my breathing measured while she examined it. While she worked, I looked up at the corner of the room above the door. There, mounted flush against the wall where the ceiling met the frame, was a small black dome, the hospital's security camera. It had been there since I checked in. I had noticed it the first night and thought nothing of it. I thought quite a lot about it now. Within 10 minutes, room 214 had more people in it than it had seen since my admission. Sarah had called the floor supervisor a heavy-set woman named Carol Briggs, who wore her authority the way some people wear uncomfortable shoes, visibly and with effort, and Carol had called the patient relations administrator, a young man with a clipboard and the perpetually apologetic expression of someone whose entire job was damage control. Ethan stood near the window with his arms folded across his chest, the picture of a devastated son holding himself together by sheer force of will. If I hadn't watched him construct that expression in real time, I might have believed it myself. I came to visit my father," Ethan told Carol, his voice carrying just the right tremor. I knocked, I came in, and he was already grimacing and holding his wrist. He said he'd been trying to reach his water glass, and he slipped. I don't know where the nurse was. I didn't see anyone in the hall. Sarah's face went through 3 emotions in 2 seconds: disbelief, indignation, and the disciplined, professional restraint that kept all of it locked below the surface. I stepped out at 2:10 to retrieve his scheduled medication from the dispensary. she said to Carol, her voice tight and precise. Standard procedure. I was gone 4 minutes at most. 4 minutes is a long time for a post-surgical patient, Ethan said. Not shouting, just stating it with the quiet certainty of a man who had rehearsed this position. Sarah's chin came up. Mr. Carter had been stable all morning. His vitals were normal. There was no clinical indication. He has a broken wrist now, Ethan said. That seems like an indication. Carol held up one hand to stop them both and turned to me. Mr. Carter, can you tell me in your own words what happened? Every person in that room was looking at me. Sarah's eyes were wide and careful, asking me silently to tell the truth. Ethan's eyes were doing something else entirely, not threatening, not pleading, calculating. He was reading my face the way the poker player reads a hand, deciding whether his bet was going to hold. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the camera in the corner above the door, the footage that already existed, that was already locked inside a server I couldn't access yet, but Ethan couldn't either. If I accused him now, it became his word against mine, and I was the man in the hospital bed with the broken bone. I needed the camera. I needed Daniel. I needed 48 hours I didn't have yet. I was reaching for the water glass on the nightstand, I said. My voice came out steady as a surveyor's level. I misjudged the distance. My wrist caught the bedrail. Sarah's breath left her in a short, sharp exhale that she covered by turning to adjust my blanket. Carol wrote something on her notepad. The administrator nodded with visible relief, the way men nod when a problem has rearranged itself into something manageable. Ethan said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved just barely a fraction of a degree, and I understood that he had registered my answer as a victory. He thought I had protected him. He thought fear or habit or the complicated love of a father for a son had just handed him exactly what he needed. He was wrong about the reason, but I let him be wrong. After Carol finished her notes, she turned to Sarah with the measured tone of institutional procedure. Nurse Mitchell, given Mr. Carter's account, there's no disciplinary action required. However, I'd like to review your documentation for this shift. Could you come to the station when you have a moment? Sarah looked at me one more time before she followed Carol out. Her expression had gone carefully neutral, the professional mask back in place. But her eyes held something that might have been hurt, or might have been trust she was extending on faith, without fully understanding why. Either way, she deserved better than what was happening to her in that room, and I knew it, and the knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. When the administrator left, Ethan pulled the chair close and sat down. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and lowered his voice. "Thank you," he said. "Dad, I know that wasn't easy. And I know He stopped, pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. "I lost control. That should not have happened. I'm sorry." I looked at my son. His eyes were wet, genuinely wet, I thought. Which somehow made it worse, because it meant some part of him was capable of remorse, and had simply decided that remorse was a cost he was willing to pay. "Are you sorry you hurt me?" I said. "Or sorry it didn't work?" The wetness in his eyes didn't disappear, but something behind it shifted. "Both," he said. And the honesty of that single word was the most frightening thing he'd said to me in 3 days. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and picked up the portfolio from the chair. "I'll give you some time to rest," he said. "But Dad, this isn't over. I need you to understand that. I don't have any other options left." He walked out. The door clicked shut. I lay in the bed with my splinted wrist resting on the blanket and my heart beating in my ears. And I thought about Sarah Mitchell, who was sitting at the nurse's station right now, answering questions about a shift she had done correctly. I thought about Carol Briggs writing in her notepad. I thought about the administrator's clipboard. And I thought about the camera. I reached for my phone with my left hand, clumsy, slow, the wrong hand for everything, and typed a message to Daniel Brooks. He broke my wrist. I told the hospital I fell. I need you to call me tonight. There is a security camera in this room, and I need to know who controls that footage. I hit send and set the phone down. The pain in my wrist was considerable. The pain in my chest, in the place where a father keeps the version of his son he always believed in, was something else entirely deeper and older and far less likely to heal clean. The hospital floor went quiet after 9. The hallway outside my door shifted from the busy shuffle of shift changes and meal carts to a low, steady hum machines, cycling soft footsteps, the occasional murmur of a night nurse making rounds. My wrist had been properly splinted by the orthopedic resident, who came down at 6, who confirmed what the initial X-ray suggested, a clean fracture of the distal radius. He told me it would heal well with proper immobilization. He told me to avoid any unnecessary stress on the joint. I thought about what qualified as unnecessary in my current situation, and almost laughed. At 11:45, when I was certain the floor was as still as it was going to get, I picked up my phone with my left hand and called Daniel Brooks. He picked up on the second ring. "William, I've been waiting." "I know. I'm sorry for the hour." "Don't apologize for the hour. Tell me everything. Start from yesterday morning." Daniel Brooks was 61 years old, a corporate attorney who had handled every significant legal matter in my life for 23 years. He had the voice of a man who had heard genuinely bad news enough times that it no longer surprised him, only informed him. I had chosen him originally because a contractor I trusted told me Daniel was the kind of lawyer who finished fights rather than extended them. I told him everything. I started with Ethan walking through the door at 9:17 on Monday morning and ended with the orthopedic resident's diagnosis 6 hours ago. I didn't editorialize. I didn't pause for him to react. I just laid it out in sequence the way I used to lay out a construction timeline. This happened then this. When I finished, Daniel was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. "The camera footage," he said. "You said it's a dome camera above the door." "Correct. Upper right corner flush mount. It's been there since I checked in." Hospital security cameras at a facility that size are typically managed by a third-party security contractor, he said. The footage cycles on a 72-hour loop unless it's flagged or preserved. I'm going to contact the hospital's legal department first thing tomorrow morning and request an emergency preservation order on all footage from room 214 for the past 72 hours. Once it's preserved, it can't be overwritten. Can they refuse? Not if I frame it correctly. There's an active internal investigation regarding a patient injury in that room. Preservation of security footage is standard protocol. I could hear him writing. "William, I need to ask you something directly. The power of attorney document Ethan brought. Did you sign any version of it at any point? Any partial signature, any initials, not a mark? Good. Now the trust." He paused. "I want to make sure you understand something, because I think it's going to matter very soon. The irrevocable trust we established in 2009, do you remember how we structured the account access? You're the co-trustee," I said, "independent of me." "Correct, which means that any legal document purporting to give a third party, including Ethan, authority over the assets held in the trust is worthless without my signature as co-trustee." His voice was steady and precise, the way a man sounds when he is giving you the most important sentence in a conversation. "An irrevocable trust. William means that neither you nor Ethan can unilaterally access, move, or liquidate those assets. The money from the Carter construction sale, your real estate holdings, your investment portfolio, all of it is inside that structure. Ethan's power of attorney cannot touch a single dollar. I closed my eyes. The ceiling above me was the same institutional white it had been every night, but it looked different now, less like a surface and more like the underside of something solid, something that held. He doesn't know that, I said. Shh, no, Daniel said. He doesn't. He thinks you keep your money in personal accounts he can freeze with a forged document, and a judge who will accept his version of events. He's been operating on an assumption that is 15 years out of date. A brief pause. Which is why I need you to continue operating as though you don't know any of this. Can you do that? You're the second person in 2 days who's asked me that question. Linda called me this afternoon, he said. She told me about the wire transfers from Margaret's accounts. I want you to know I already knew about some of them. Margaret consulted me once about 8 years ago. She was trying to find a way to help Ethan without it affecting the trust structure. He exhaled. I told her what she was doing was unsustainable. She thanked me and continued doing it. I respected her decision. I shouldn't have. The ache in my chest deepened. Not anger at Daniel, not anger at Margaret, just the particular grief of understanding that the people who loved you most were sometimes the ones building the walls you'd eventually have to tear down. There's something else, Daniel said. Ethan's company filings. I've been monitoring them for the past 4 months because something in the numbers looked wrong to me. William the company isn't failing because of a bad market or delayed contracts. The operating accounts show consistent withdrawals to a personal LLC that Ethan controls separately. He's been pulling money out of the company and calling it consulting fees. My hand tightened around the phone. He's been stealing from his own company. Systematically, for at least 3 years. Daniel's voice hardened by 1 degree, the only sign he ever gave that something had moved him. Which means the financial crisis he presented to you yesterday wasn't misfortune. It was the predictable endpoint of a pattern he created himself. I lay in the dark with that information settling over me like cold water. Daniel, so I said, what do I do tomorrow when he comes back? Nothing, he said. You smile, you listen, and you give him absolutely nothing to work with. I need 48 hours to build what we need. Can you hold for 48 hours? I thought about Ethan's eyes when he said both. I thought about Sarah Mitchell at the nurses' station. I thought about 40 years of mornings in the dirt and the rain building something I believed in. I've held longer than that, I said, before I tell you what Linda had been hiding from me for 8 months. What she found buried inside 6 years of financial records that my own son hoped I would never see. I need to know you're still with me. Drop a "still here" in the comments right now. Just those 2 words. Because what I'm about to reveal changed everything I thought I knew about the man my son had become, and I don't want you to miss a single word of it. One more thing before we continue. The stories on this channel are built from real emotional truths, but some details and characters have been shaped for storytelling. If that's not your thing, no judgment, this is a good moment to step away. But if you're staying, hold on tight. Because the truth I'm about to share is worse than anything you've imagined so far. Linda arrived before the breakfast tray. I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She had a particular walk, quick and deliberate, the walk of a woman who had decided where she was going and saw no reason to take longer than necessary getting there. She came through the door at 7:52 with a paper bag from the diner 2 blocks down and the expression of someone who had not slept much either. Scrambled eggs and toast, she said, setting the bag on the table beside my bed. The cafeteria food here would make a strong man surrender. She looked at my splinted wrist, and her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she controlled it. How bad is the pain this morning? Manageable, I said. Linda, sit down. I need to tell you about my conversation with Daniel last night. She sat. I told her everything Daniel had said. The trust structure, the co-trustee arrangement, the preservation order for the camera footage, and what Daniel had found in Ethan's company filings. The consulting fee withdrawals. The LLC. 3 years of systematic bleeding disguised as legitimate expenses. By the time I finished, Linda had set down her coffee cup and was pressing both hands flat against her thighs, something she did when she was working very hard to stay calm. I need to show you something, she said. Her voice was careful and even. I was going to wait until you were stronger, but after what you've just told me. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a large manila envelope thick with paper. She held it in both hands for a moment before setting it on my lap. I hired a forensic accountant 8 months ago. His name is Ray Tuttle. He's retired IRS, been doing private work for 12 years. I gave him everything I found in Margaret's files and asked him to follow the money. I looked at the envelope. My left hand, the good one, rested on top of it. How much did you find? Open it, she said quietly. I opened it. The first page was a summary sheet, Ray Tuttle's letterhead dated 6 weeks ago, organized in clean columns that hit me like a series of small collisions. 14 separate transactions spanning 6 years. Not from Margaret's accounts this time, from Carter Construction's subcontractor payment records, going back to 2017. Payments issued to 3 companies, Ridgeline Supply Coimbras, Apex Material Group, and Blue Summit Contractors. Combined total $823,000. These companies, I said, are they real? Ridgeline Supply was dissolved in 2018, 4 months after the last payment to it. Linda leaned forward and tapped the second page. Apex Material Group was registered to a P.O. box in Gastonia. Blue Summit Contractors lists Ethan as registered agent under a name variation E. Marcus Carter. Her voice didn't shake, but there was something underneath it that sounded like it was costing her real effort to stay level. William Carter Construction was sold in 2019. These payments went out between 2017 and 2019 using the company's subcontractor disbursement system. Someone with internal access processed them as legitimate vendor payments. My heart felt like it had dropped 6 inches in my chest and stopped. He used my company's payment system, I said, while I was still running it. Yes. To pay himself. Through ghost companies. Yes. Linda's eyes were wet now, not spilling over, just bright with the kind of grief that comes from having known something terrible for months and waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. William, I'm so sorry. I should have come to you sooner. But you were planning the sale, and then Margaret got sick, and I kept telling myself I needed more before I brought it to you. More proof. More certainty. Because I knew what it would do to you, and I needed to be sure before I did that. I set the summary sheet down on the blanket. My left hand was trembling, not from pain, but from the effort of absorbing what I was holding. $823,000. Not loans. Not bailouts with a handshake and a promise. Theft. Clean, documented, systematic theft from the company I built with 4 decades of my life. Linda. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Does Ray Tuttle's report hold up legally? She straightened. The grief in her eyes sharpened into something harder and more useful. He cross-referenced the payments against state business registration records, bank routing numbers, and the dissolution filings. Every transaction is traceable. He said. She pulled a second document from the envelope, a one-page letter on Ray Tuttle's letterhead. He said if a DA's office wanted to pursue it, this would qualify as wire fraud under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 1343 because the payments crossed state lines through the banking system. Wire fraud. Federal charges. The kind of thing that doesn't go away with an apology or a family conversation over dinner. He didn't just lie to me, I said. He didn't just come to this hospital and break my wrist and try to steal my retirement. He did all of that on top of something he'd already been doing for years. I looked at my sister. My eyes were burning not from tears I was going to let fall, but from the pressure of keeping them back. Linda, do you understand what I gave that company I was in those job sites before sunrise? I negotiated contracts that kept 40 families employed. I built something honest, and I handed it to buyers who I believed would honor what it stood for. And the whole time, I know, she said. Her voice broke on those two words, and she pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, collecting herself. Then she reached out and covered my left hand with hers. I know, William. I know exactly what you gave it. That's why I spent 8 months making absolutely certain before I brought this to you. Because you deserved certainty. Not suspicion. Proof. I looked at my sister's hand over mine. She had Margaret's hands, the same shape of knuckle, the same way of holding on without squeezing too hard. Give everything to Daniel, I said. Today. All of it, Ray Tuttle's report, the transaction records, everything. Already scanned and sent at 6 this morning, she said. And for the first time in days, something that resembled a smile crossed her face, small and tired, but real. I've been waiting a long time to send that email. I looked out the window at the October sky, pale blue and cold and indifferent. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was presumably waking up, getting dressed, deciding how to approach me today. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Linda, I said, there's one more thing I need from you, and it's going to require you to answer the door if Ethan shows up at your house. Her smile faded. She looked at me steadily. What are you planning? Nothing yet, I said. But Daniel needs 48 hours, and I need Ethan to keep believing he still has options. Which means I need him to keep moving, keep talking, keep pushing until Daniel has everything in place. I met her eyes. If he comes to you, let him talk. Don't agree to anything. Don't threaten anything. Just listen and tell me word for word what he says. Linda looked at me for a long moment, reading me the way only a younger sister can read a brother she has known for 65 years. You already know he's going to come to me, she said. Don't you? I know my son, I said. When the direct approach fails, he goes around. He always has. I shifted against the pillow, feeling the steady throb in my wrist that had become the background music of my days. He went around Margaret for 11 years. He went around me for 6. The difference this time is that we're ready. 2 days passed in the particular way that hospital days pass slowly in the individual hours, surprisingly fast when you looked back at them. My wrist ached with a deep rhythmic persistence that the pain medication blunted, but never fully erased. I ate what they brought me, did what the physical therapist asked, and spent the in-between hours thinking through the geometry of what was coming. Daniel had called twice with updates. Linda checked in every morning. Ethan had not appeared. The absence of Ethan was louder than his presence had been. On Wednesday morning, a hospital administrator named Greg Harlan knocked on my door and asked if I was available for a brief meeting in the third-floor conference room. He was young, mid-30s, khaki pants, the kind of careful neutrality in his face that comes from spending years managing situations nobody wanted to be in. He said the meeting was routine. He said it wouldn't take long. The word routine should have been my first warning. The word long should have been my second. The third-floor conference room smelled of stale coffee and fresh printer paper. Greg Harlan sat at the head of the small table. Beside him sat a man I didn't recognize, late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, a leather messenger bag he set on the table with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to walking into rooms where he held the authority. And beside him sat Ethan. My son was wearing the charcoal suit again, the one he'd had pressed for the power of attorney attempt. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a pen in his hand, and he looked at me with an expression of such carefully arranged concern that I wanted to ask him how long he'd practiced it in the mirror. "Dad." He stood partway from his chair as I sat down, a performance of filial deference that fooled nobody in the room except possibly Greg Simmons. "I'm glad you could come. I was invited," I said pleasantly. "Greg, would you mind telling me who this gentleman is?" Greg cleared his throat. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb. He's a licensed psychiatrist, and he's here at the request of—" "At my request," Ethan said. "Dad, I want to be honest with you about why we're here. I've been genuinely concerned about some of the decisions you've been making lately. The refusal to allow me to help manage your finances. Some of the things you've said that seemed—" He paused, choosing his word. "Confused. I asked Dr. Webb to come and have a conversation with you. Just a conversation, to make sure you're getting the support you need." Dr. Marcus Webb, a private psychiatrist Ethan had retained specifically for this purpose, bypassing the hospital's own psychiatric staff, opened his messenger bag and produced a yellow legal pad of his own. He looked at me with the particular brand of professional warmth that is technically indistinguishable from genuine warmth and yet feels nothing like it. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I understand this might feel unexpected. I just want to ask you a few questions if that's all right. Nothing formal, just a conversation." I understood immediately what was happening. In North Carolina, a guardianship petition, a legal request to declare someone mentally incapacitated and appoint another person to manage their affairs, requires a psychiatric evaluation as supporting documentation. Dr. Webb was not here to help me. He was here to produce a document that would give Ethan standing in probate court, the specialized North Carolina court that handles matters of legal competency and estate management. Probate court, a judge. A legal declaration that William Carter could no longer manage his own life. "Of course," I said, and folded my hands on the table. Dr. Webb began with standard orientation questions: date, location, the name of the sitting president. I answered each one correctly and without hesitation. He moved to more complex territory. Could I describe my current financial situation in general terms? Did I have legal representation? Was I aware of any pending legal matters involving my estate? I described the trust structure Daniel and I had built in 2009 with a level of technical precision that required Dr. Webb to write faster to keep up. I named the relevant statutes. I referenced the co-trustee arrangement and explained in plain language why a standard power of attorney could not override it. I watched Webb's pen slow down, then pause. Ethan's jaw tightened by a fraction. The yellow legal pad in front of him had nothing written on it. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Webb said carefully, "your son has described some instances where your behavior seemed erratic to him, refusing reasonable requests, becoming agitated without apparent cause. Does that match your experience of the past few days?" I looked at the doctor with the steady patience of a man who has negotiated contracts with people who did not want to give him what he needed. "Dr. Webb, what my son has described as erratic is my refusal to sign a document that would have transferred legal control of my assets to him without independent oversight. What he's described as agitation is my insistence on reading that document before responding to it. I paused. Are those behaviors consistent with mental incapacity in your professional experience? Webb's expression did not change, but something shifted beneath it, a recalibration subtle and significant. He made a note on his pad. Ethan leaned forward. Dad, nobody is trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to protect you. From what, Ethan? My voice was warm. Genuinely warm, I made sure of it. Name one specific thing you're protecting me from. He opened his mouth and closed it. The legal pad in front of him remained blank. I think we have what we need for today, Dr. Webb said, gathering his papers with the careful movements of a man reassessing his position. Mr. Carter, thank you for your time. As the meeting broke up and Greg Harlan ushered people toward the door, Ethan lingered. He waited until Webb and Simmons were in the hallway before he turned to me, and the performance fell away entirely. What was underneath it was raw and cornered and furious. This isn't over, he said, his voice dropping to something low and tight. I'm filing the guardianship petition this week. A judge will make the determination, not you. I stood up from the table. My hip ached from the chair, and my wrist throbbed, and I was 72 years old in a hospital where my son had broken my bone and tried to steal my life, and I felt none of those things in my voice when I answered him. Then I'll see you in court, Ethan, I said, and I smiled, not to hurt him, not to perform. I smiled because for the first time since Monday morning, the terrain had shifted underneath us, and he was the one who didn't know it yet. I walked out of the conference room and down the hall toward the elevator. In my jacket pocket, my phone buzzed once. A text from Daniel Webb's evaluation won't hold. Holloway confirmed for Friday. I pressed the elevator button and exhaled slowly. Margaret Holloway, the guardian ad litem the court would appoint independently to evaluate my competency, a retired judge with 20 years on the bench and a reputation Daniel had described in 3 words: fair, thorough, unimpressed. She was the court's voice in this process, not Ethan's, not mine. The elevator opened. I stepped inside. 48 hours, Daniel had said. We were almost there. After the elevator doors closed behind me that afternoon, I stood alone in the small metal box for 3 floors and did something I had not permitted myself to do since Monday morning. I let my hands shake, just for 3 floors, just until the doors opened again on the 2nd level and I had to be a person walking down a hallway. I pressed my left hand against the elevator wall and breathed through my nose and let my body do what it had been holding back for 4 days, the trembling that lives underneath the stillness when a man has been maintaining composure longer than his nervous system would prefer. Then the doors opened, and I walked back to room 214, and I was William Carter again. After dinner, institutional chicken and green beans that tasted of nothing in particular, I opened my laptop for the first time since the surgery. The screen was too bright in the dim room, and I turned it down, put on my reading glasses, and opened Daniel's email. Daniel's email was 4 pages long. I read every word twice, then set the laptop on my blanket and looked at the ceiling. 3 things had moved while I slept. The hospital's legal department had confirmed emergency preservation of all security footage from room 214. The footage existed, it was locked, and nobody could touch it. Daniel had filed a formal Adult Protective Services report under North Carolina General Statute 14B, attaching my medical records and Ray Tuttle's forensic summary. An APS investigator would make contact within 72 hours, and he had submitted a counter-filing to probate court opposing Ethan's guardianship petition, requesting the appointment of a guardian ad litem, an independent officer of the court, with no connection to either side, and no agenda except the truth. Margaret Holloway had accepted the appointment. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since Tuesday afternoon. I called Daniel at 9:15. He picked up on the first ring. "You read it?" he said. "3 times. Tell me about Holloway." Retired Superior Court judge, 22 years on the bench in Mecklenburg County. She did gal work for 6 years after retirement because, as she told me once, she found she missed having something at stake. His voice carried the particular warmth of a man describing someone he genuinely respected. She is constitutionally incapable of being impressed by anything that isn't true. Ethan's psychiatrist produced a 2-page preliminary assessment. She will produce 12 pages of documented evaluation. There is no comparison. When does she meet with me? Friday morning, 9 o'clock. She'll come to your room. Treat it like a deposition, thorough, honest, no editorializing. She's seen every variety of family dispute that exists. She will not be moved by performance from either direction. Understood. I shifted the phone to my left hand, feeling the familiar pull of the splint on my right. Daniel, the criminal piece. Where does that stand? The APS report creates an official record of the financial exploitation going back 6 years. Once their investigation opens, it runs alongside what I'm building with the DA's office. He paused. "William, I want to be clear with you about the timeline. The criminal case will take months, possibly longer. What we're doing right now, the camera footage, Holloway, the APS report, these are the foundations. We are building a structure that cannot be rushed and cannot be collapsed." "I understand," I said. "I built things for 40 years, Daniel. I know what a foundation looks like." A brief pause. "There's one more thing, and I want you to hear it clearly." His voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more careful. "Ethan is going to feel this pressure building. He may not know the specifics of what we've put in motion, but he will feel the walls closing. When that happens, men like Ethan, men who have been operating from a position of assumed control, they don't retreat. They accelerate. They make moves that are bigger and faster and less calculated than anything they've done before." He stopped. "I need you to be prepared for him to do something we haven't anticipated." My chest tightened. "Like what?" "I don't know yet. That's what concerns me." His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that comes from discipline, not from the absence of worry. "Just don't be alone with him, William. Not in that room, not in a hallway. Make sure there's always someone nearby who can be a witness." I thought about the camera above the door. I thought about the fact that every time Ethan had escalated, he had chosen moments when no one was watching, or moments when he believed no one was watching. "I'll be careful," I said. "Good." He exhaled. "Get some sleep. Friday is the turning point. After Holloway files her report, we shift from defense to offense and we don't look back." I set the phone down and looked at the room around me, the institutional walls, the monitor with its steady green line, the window showing nothing but the dark reflection of the room itself. 4 days ago, I had been a man recovering from hip surgery, counting ceiling tiles, and waiting for the physical therapist. 4 days ago, I had said one word to my son and watched the shape of everything change. I closed the laptop. I turned off the reading light. I lay in the dark with my splinted wrist resting on the blanket and my heart beating at a slow, deliberate pace. And I thought about Margaret Holloway walking into this room on Friday morning, a woman who had spent 22 years separating what was true from what people needed her to believe. I was ready to be seen clearly. I had been waiting my whole life for someone to look at me without the distortion of what they needed from me. For the first time in 4 days, I slept before midnight. Linda never called before 7 in the morning. In 65 years, I could count on one hand the times she had reached me before the sun was fully up, And each one of those times, something had already gone wrong. So when my phone buzzed at 6:58 on Thursday morning, and her name lit up the screen, I had already pushed myself to sitting before I answered. "He came to my house last night," she said. No greeting, no preamble. Her voice was steady in the way of a person who has had several hours to process something and has decided that steadiness is the most useful thing she can offer. "What time?" "On 10:40. I was already in bed. He knocked, didn't ring the bell, just knocked 3 times, evenly spaced. The kind of knock that says, "I'm not going away." She exhaled. I got up. I looked through the peephole. And then I did what you told me to do. I turned on my phone recorder before I opened the door. My heart rate picked up. "You recorded him." "Every word." A brief pause, and I heard something shift, the sound of her moving in her kitchen, the clink of a coffee cup. "William, I need to tell you what he said before I send you the file. Because some of it is going to be hard to hear, and I'd rather you hear my voice first." "Tell me." She took a breath. He was calm. That was the first thing I noticed. Not angry, not desperate the way he was at the hospital. Just cold and very deliberate. He said he knew I had been talking to Daniel. He said he knew about the forensic accountant. He said... She stopped for a moment. When she continued, her voice had developed a faint tremor she was working hard to suppress. He said that if I continued to interfere in what he called a private family matter, he would file a complaint with the State Bar Association against Daniel for elder exploitation, using his position as a trusted advisor to manipulate a vulnerable client into signing away assets that should rightfully go to his heir. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. That's not a legitimate complaint. Daniel has done nothing. "I know that," Linda said, "and Ethan knows that. But he also knows that a bar complaint, even a baseless one, takes months to investigate, costs Daniel time and money to defend, and creates exactly the kind of public record that makes a client question whether to keep their attorney." Her voice steadied again, sharpening into the precise accountant's clarity she had always possessed. "It's not a legal weapon, William. It's a delay weapon. He wants Daniel off balance long enough to push the guardianship through before we can respond." The cold in my chest was something I recognized. Not fear, but the particular clarity that comes when a person finally shows you their entire hand, and you realize it's smaller than you thought. "What did he say about you?" I asked. "About what would happen to you if you didn't stop." A short pause. "He said that my involvement in your financial affairs over the past 8 months could be characterized as undue influence over an elderly sibling. He said he had documentation of my meetings with Daniel and with Ray Tuttle. He said that if this went to court, he would name me as a co-respondent, someone who had systematically worked to isolate you from your only son and direct your assets away from your natural heir." Her breath caught for just a moment. "He said it pleasantly, William. That was the part that frightened me most. He wasn't threatening me the way a desperate man threatens. He was informing me, the way you inform someone of a policy." I sat with that for 3 full seconds, letting the shape of it settle in my mind. My son, 43 years old, standing on his aunt's porch at 10:40 at night, smiling pleasantly while he dismantled the people who loved his father. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I'm furious," she said, and the tremor in her voice gave way entirely to something harder and cleaner. "I am absolutely furious, and I have been awake since 11 last night going over every piece of paper I have, making sure everything is in order because that boy has no idea who he is dealing with." A sound that was almost a laugh, fierce and short. "I kept every receipt, William. Every bank statement, every email, every note from Ray Tuttle. I have 8 months of documentation, and I am not frightened of a man who thinks threatening a 65-year-old woman at her front door in the dark is a winning strategy. Despite everything, the splinted wrist, the aching hip, the weight of everything the past 4 days had dropped on my chest. I felt something loosen in my ribcage, something that might, in better circumstances, have been pride. "Send the recording to Daniel," I said, "right now before anything else." "Already sent at 6 this morning," she said. I forwarded it to him with a subject line that said Exhibit C. "Exhibit C," I repeated. "Exhibit A is Ray Tuttle's forensic report. Exhibit B is the documentation of the ghost company transactions." She paused. I may have been planning this for longer than I let on. I pressed my left hand over my eyes for a moment, feeling the burn that had been threatening to become tears for 4 days, choosing this moment, finally, to arrive at the surface. Not grief, not anger. Something older and more complicated, the feeling of a man who has been fighting alone for a very long time, discovering that he was not in fact alone. That someone had been fighting beside him in a different room in the dark, where he couldn't see. "Linda," I said, and my voice came out rough at the edges. "I owe you more than I know how to say." "You don't owe me anything." Her voice was firm and warm in equal measure. "You're my brother. That's not a debt. That's just what it is." I cleared my throat. "Daniel needs to know about the bar complaint threat. That changes what we prepare for Holloway. I already told him. He called me at 6:30. Apparently he's an early riser when his clients are in trouble." A pause. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "The bar complaint threat is the single most useful thing Ethan has done for our case. A man who threatens an attorney with a baseless complaint to delay legal proceedings has just demonstrated to the court that he will use any available mechanism to obstruct due process." Those were his exact words. He sounded pleased. I thought about that. I thought about Daniel sitting in his office at 6:30 in the morning, reading Linda's email and feeling pleased. "What time is it now?" I asked. 6:58. "Holloway comes tomorrow at 9. "I know." Linda's voice softened slightly. "William, you're going to be all right. You know that, don't you? Not because everything will be easy from here, but because you finally stopped pretending it wasn't happening." I looked out the hospital window at the early gray of a Thursday morning in October, the sky the color of something that hadn't decided yet what kind of day it wanted to be. "I'll call you after Holloway leaves," I said. "I'll be waiting," she said. "And William." "Yes. Don't let him see you worried tomorrow. Not 1 second." "I know," I said. "You told me that 4 days ago." "I'm telling you again," she said. "Because some things are worth saying twice." I woke up at 5:30 on Friday morning without an alarm, which was not unusual for a man who had spent 40 years starting before dawn. What was unusual was the quality of the wakefulness, not the groggy, reluctant surface breaking of a man dragged up by habit, but the clean, immediate alertness of someone whose body knows something important is about to happen. I lay in the dim room, listening to the floor come alive around me. The 6 o'clock medication rounds, the breakfast carts, the shift change conversation at the nurse's station carrying through the door in fragments. I ate what they brought me. I asked the morning nurse, a young man named Kevin, who had the efficient cheerfulness of someone who genuinely enjoyed his work, if I could get a few minutes in the bathroom before 9 to clean up properly. "Of course, Mr. Carter," he said. "Big day." "Something like that," I said. I put on the shirt Linda had brought me 2 days ago, a plain blue button-down, nothing formal, but pressed and clean. I combed my hair. I sat in the chair beside the bed rather than in the bed itself because I was not going to meet Margaret Holloway as a patient lying down if I could help it. She arrived at 9 o'clock precisely. Not 9:01, not 8:58. 9 o'clock, as if she had paused in the hallway for exactly the right number of seconds to arrive on the agreed minute. Margaret Holloway was 70 years old, shorter than I expected, with close-cropped white hair and the kind of posture that comes not from effort, but from having held herself upright for so many decades that anything else would feel foreign. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and carried a leather portfolio that was old enough to have developed its own personality. She shook my hand, my left one, noting the splint on my right without commenting on it, and sat down in the visitor's chair with the unhurried ease of a woman who had conducted 10,000 of these conversations and understood that rushing them helped no one. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I'm Margaret Holloway. I've been appointed by the court as guardian ad litem in the matter of the petition filed by your son. Do you understand what that role means?" "You're the court's eyes," I said. "Not my advocate and not Ethan's. You evaluate and you report to the judge directly without being filtered through either side's attorney." She tilted her head slightly, not quite a nod, but an acknowledgement. "That's correct. I want to be clear with you that nothing you say to me is confidential in the traditional sense. My report goes to the presiding judge and is available to both parties. Do you have any questions before we begin?" "Just one," I said. "How long have you been doing this work?" "6 years since I retired from the bench." She uncapped her pen. "Before that, 22 years as a superior court judge in this county. I have evaluated 231 individuals in this capacity." She looked at me steadily over the rims of her glasses. "I mention that not to impress you, Mr. Carter, but so that you understand I have a fairly reliable sense of what I'm looking at." "Then let's not waste your time," I said. "Ask me what you need to ask." She began methodically. "Date, day of the week, the name of the hospital, the name of the current governor of North Carolina." She asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. She asked me to name the last 3 presidents in reverse order. I answered everything without hesitation, and I watched her write, not frantically, not with the performative note-taking of someone building a case, but with the careful, unhurried strokes of someone recording what was actually there. Then she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Mr. Carter, your son's petition states that you have refused reasonable requests for assistance with your financial affairs, and that this refusal is inconsistent with the behavior of a person exercising sound judgment. How do you respond to that characterization?" I responded to it by reading the document he presented. I said, "It was a durable power of attorney that granted total and irrevocable authority over every financial asset I possess. I have a trust structure in place that was established 15 years ago with an independent co-trustee specifically to protect against exactly this kind of unilateral access. Refusing to sign a document that would circumvent 15 years of careful estate planning is not a symptom of poor judgment. It is poor judgment's opposite." Holloway's pen moved. "Can you describe the trust structure?" I described it. I named the relevant statutes, the year of establishment, the co-trustee arrangement, and the specific categories of assets held within it. I described the difference between personal accounts and trust-held accounts, and why a standard POA could not penetrate the latter. I watched Holloway's expression as I spoke, not for approval, but because a person's face when they're listening tells you whether they're actually hearing you or waiting for a gap to fill with their own conclusion. Holloway was hearing every word. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, not hesitant, just thinking. Then she said, "Your son also states that your relationship with your attorney, Daniel Brooks, has become disproportionately influential, that Mr. Brooks has encouraged you to act against your own family's interests. Something moved through my chest at that. A hot flash of anger. I kept entirely out of my voice. Daniel Brooks has worked with me for 23 years. He drafted the trust, he manages the co-trustee function, and he has in the past week worked to ensure that evidence of a physical assault and 6 years of financial fraud is properly documented and preserved. I met her eyes. If that constitutes disproportionate influence, I'd be curious to know what appropriate influence looks like. Holloway wrote for several seconds. Then she put her pen down completely and folded her hands on the portfolio. Mr. Carter, I'm going to ask you something that isn't on my standard checklist, and you are not obligated to answer it. But in my experience, it tends to matter. Go ahead, I said. What do you want? She asked. Not legally, not strategically. What do you actually want from what comes next? The question landed differently than I expected. I sat with it for a moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it correctly. I want to finish healing from my surgery, I said. I want to go home to a house that isn't full of other people's emergencies. I want the money I spent 40 years earning to go somewhere that does something good with it, instead of somewhere that treats it as a right they were born into. I paused. And I want Sarah Mitchell's name cleared. She did nothing wrong, and she deserves to have her record reflect that. Holloway looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but a kind of recognition. The look of someone who has heard many versions of a story and can identify with some precision which version is true. Thank you, Mr. Carter, she said. She closed the portfolio, capped her pen, and stood. My report will go to the presiding judge within 10 days. I want you to know that I will say exactly what I observed, nothing more and nothing less. That's all I'm asking for, I said. She extended her hand again, my left one, and shook it firmly. Then she walked to the door, opened it, and paused. One more thing, she said, turning back. In 30 years of legal work, I have interviewed people in this room who were genuinely struggling, people who needed protection. She looked at me steadily. You are not one of those people, Mr. Carter. She walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat in the blue button-down shirt in the chair beside my hospital bed, and for the first time since Monday morning, I let myself feel what I actually felt, not the managed, strategic calm I had been carrying like a tool, but the real thing underneath it. My eyes burned. My throat ached. My wrist throbbed in its splint. And somewhere beneath all of it, something that had been wound impossibly tight for 5 days began very slowly to release. Daniel's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Tryon Street that had been there since before I started Carter Construction and would probably be there long after neither of us needed it anymore. The elevator opened onto the reception area that smelled of leather and old paper, not the sterile, processed air of the hospital, but the air of a place where serious things were decided by people who had thought carefully about them. I had been discharged 3 days after Holloway's visit. My wrist still splinted my hip, still stiff, moving at the pace of a man who had learned the hard way, not to rush a body that was asking for patience. Linda had taken me to her house for the first few nights, 2 bedrooms, a guest bathroom that smelled of lavender soap, and the particular comfort of being somewhere that someone was glad you were in. Now it was the following Friday, 1 week after Holloway's visit, and Daniel had called to say he was ready. Linda and I sat across from him at a conference table covered with organized stacks of paper, each stack with a small handwritten label in Daniel's precise architect-like script. He stood at the head of the table with his jacket off his sleeves, rolled to the elbow, looking like a man who had not left this floor in several days and did not particularly mind. Before we start, Daniel said. I want to ask you both something. Are you prepared to see everything, not just the summary, the actual documents, the actual footage, the complete picture? He looked at me directly. Some of it is going to be difficult, William. I want you to know that going in. Show me, I said. He opened his laptop. Footage first. The screen showed room 214. The timestamp in the corner read the date and time of Tuesday afternoon 2:15, the day everything broke. The camera angle was from the upper corner above the door, looking down and across the room at an angle that captured the bed, the chair, and the space between them. I watched myself lying in the hospital bed. I watched Ethan come in. I watched the conversation. I remembered the gestures, the folder, the pen pushed toward my hand. And then I watched what happened next, and it was different from how I remembered it, because memory compresses pain into sensation and strips away the visual detail, and the camera kept every detail. Ethan's hand closing around my wrist, the angle of the pull, the precise moment the resistance gave way. And then the detail Daniel had mentioned on the phone 2 weeks ago, the detail he said changed everything, Ethan letting go. A full second of release, and then deliberately a second grab and a sharp downward torque that produced the sound I would not forget for the rest of my life. It was not an accident of struggle. It was sequential, intentional. A choice made in the space of the breath. Linda made a sound beside me, a short, involuntary catch of breath that she pressed her hand over her mouth to contain. Her eyes were bright and wet and furious, and her other hand gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "Stop it there," I said. Daniel paused the footage. I looked at the frozen image on the screen for a moment. My son caught mid-motion in a room with a camera he didn't know was watching. Then I looked at Daniel. "What does the DA say?" "The DA's office reviewed this footage yesterday morning." Daniel's voice was even, but the evenness was doing work. The assistant DA assigned to the case said, and I'm quoting directly, that this is among the clearest documentation of intentional elder abuse she has seen in 14 years of prosecution. He closed the laptop. She is prepared to move forward with felony charges under North Carolina General Statute 14B, Chapter 32-3, felony serious injury by intentional act, with an elder abuse enhancement under Chapter 108A. He paused. The enhancement adds a mandatory minimum. "What does that mean in plain language?" Linda asked. Her voice was steady but thin at the edges. "It means the charge carries real prison time, not a fine and a suspended sentence." Daniel sat down. "But that's only one piece of what we have. Let me show you the rest." He spread the financial documents across the table systematically. Ray Tuttle's forensic report, first, then the individual transaction records, then the state registration filings for the 3 ghost companies. He walked us through each one the way he had once walked me through construction contracts, point by point. No shortcuts, no assumptions about what I already understood. 14 transactions. 6 years. $823,000 routed through companies that existed on paper and nowhere else. Each payment processed through Carter Construction's legitimate subcontractor disbursement system, which meant whoever processed them had either been deceived or had authorization. And since the only people with that level of internal access were Ethan and the company's comptroller, who had already provided a sworn statement that she had processed the payments, as directed by Ethan, the trail was unambiguous. "Wire fraud," I said. "Federal, yes. 18 U.S.C. 1343. Because the payments crossed state lines through the banking system, it becomes a federal matter rather than just state fraud." The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has been briefed. Daniel tapped the recording Linda had made. And this the conversation at Linda's house. This is obstruction. Threatening a witness and threatening legal counsel to delay proceedings. That's a separate charge entirely. Linda let out a long breath. He built this on himself, she said almost to herself. Every single piece of it. He did, Daniel said. He looked at me. William, there's one more thing. I saved it for last, because I wanted you to have the full context before you heard it. He reached into the bottom of one of the stacks and produced a single sheet of paper, plain white, no letterhead. The hospital completed their internal investigation 2 days ago. They reviewed the footage, reviewed Sarah Mitchell's shift documentation, and reviewed the timeline of events. He slid the paper across the table. This is their formal finding. I picked it up. It was a 1-page summary concluding that nurse Sarah Mitchell had followed all applicable protocols during her shift on Tuesday, that her absence from the room fell within standard practice parameters for medication retrieval, and that the patient's injury was in no way attributable to any action or inaction on her part. The final line read, "The hospital extends its formal apology to Nurse Mitchell for any distress caused by the preliminary review process." I set the paper down. Something in my chest that had been clenched since Tuesday afternoon, something I hadn't even fully identified until this moment released. She gets her record back, I said. Completely clean, Daniel confirmed. The hospital's legal team also indicated they may be filing a civil complaint against Ethan for the false report made to hospital administration. That's separate from what we're doing, but it adds another layer of documented misconduct to the overall record. Linda reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her grip was warm and steady. "William?" she said softly. "It's over. The defense part, anyway." I looked at the table covered with evidence: 6 years of theft, 5 days of assault and manipulation, all of it laid out in organized stacks with handwritten labels. I thought about the morning I had said one word to my son and watched the shape of everything change. I thought about 40 years of honest work reduced in my son's mind to a balance he was owed. "Not quite over," I said. I looked at Daniel. "What's the last thing you need from me? You said last week there was one document left." Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a single folded page. He placed it in front of me. "I need you to sign this," he said. "Not because the law requires it, because it's the right thing to do, and because it's what you've already decided, whether you've said it out loud yet or not." I unfolded the page and read it. My eyes moved to the last line. I sat with it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. Not the legal weight, but the other kind. The kind that comes from a decision that cannot be unmade. Then I reached for the pen. The document Daniel had placed in front of me the previous afternoon was a formal authorization, a single page that gave Daniel permission to act on my behalf in notifying all co-signed financial institutions of my withdrawal of backing, initiating the commercial eviction process on the property housing Ethan's business accounts, and filing the complete evidence package with the Mecklenburg County DA's office as a formal criminal complaint. I signed it at 4:17 in the afternoon. Daniel had it processed before 5. By 9 the following morning, I was sitting in Linda's kitchen, drinking real coffee, the kind made from actual ground beans, in an actual pot, not the machine variety that tasted of institutional indifference. When my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, first notifications went out at 8. "His phone is going to start ringing within the hour." "How are you feeling?" I typed back. "Like a man who slept 7 hours straight for the first time in 2 weeks." Daniel's response came in 4 seconds. "Good. Stay near your phone." I set the cup down and looked out Linda's kitchen window at the backyard, a small rectangle of November grass, brown at the edges, with a bird feeder she'd had since Margaret gave it to her 15 years ago. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of autumn day in Charlotte that feels like the world has been freshly wiped down. I thought about Ethan waking up this morning in his apartment, checking his phone, seeing notifications he didn't know were coming. 40 years of farming the soil of my own life, and this was the harvest. Daniel called at 10:23. "It's moving," he said, and I could hear something in his voice I had not heard before. Not excitement exactly, but the particular energy of a man watching a structure he built performing exactly as designed. The automotive lender received my letter of withdrawal this morning. Under the co-sign agreement, my withdrawal as guarantor triggers an immediate review of the loan status, because Ethan has been in default on his portion for 4 consecutive months, which he apparently believed I didn't know. The lender has issued a demand for the full remaining balance. $38,000 due in full within 15 business days. He doesn't have $38,000, I said. He does not. Which means the lender will initiate repossession proceedings against the vehicle. Daniel paused. His car, William. The one he drove to the hospital. It will be gone before the end of the month. I pressed my left hand flat on Linda's kitchen table and breathed through what I felt. Not satisfaction, not vindictive pleasure, but something more complicated and more honest than either of those things. The kind of feeling that comes when a consequence finally arrives at the correct address after being rerouted for years. "What about the business property?" I asked. The commercial lease for his office space, Ethan's company, has been behind on rent for 8 months. The property management company has been sending notices he's been ignoring. Daniel's voice sharpened. I contacted them directly this morning and provided documentation showing that the financial backing he claimed to have from Carter Construction, which he has been using informally as a reference in lease negotiations, does not exist and never did. They are proceeding with formal eviction. He'll receive the notice today. Today, I repeated. Certified mail delivered to his office by 1 o'clock. A brief pause. There's something else. The banks holding his 2 business lines of credit, the ones where I had been listed informally as a reference, not as a co-signer, but referenced nonetheless in his creditworthiness assessment, both received copies of the DA complaint this morning. Standard disclosure protocol when a fraud investigation touches a financial institution's client. He cleared his throat. One of them has already frozen his operating account pending review. The other called my office this morning to inform me they would be requesting additional documentation before the next draw period. I sat with that for a moment. The operating account frozen. The office lease terminated. The car on its way to a repossession lot. 3 separate pillars of the life Ethan had constructed, the life that required my name, my money, my silent backing to stand upright, pulling away from each other simultaneously. Daniel, I said. How long before he calls me? I'd be surprised if he hasn't already tried. A pause. Has he? I checked my phone. 4 missed calls. Ethan's name 4 times between 9:15 and 10:05. No voicemails. 4 times, I said. No messages. Don't answer, Daniel said. Not yet. Everything he needs to say to you at this point should go through attorneys. If he calls again and leaves a message, forward it to me without listening to it twice. Whatever he says in the next 48 hours, he's going to say from a place of panic, and panic makes people say things that become evidence. I set the phone face down on the table. What about Linda? Linda should not answer either. I've already told her. His voice gentled slightly. William, I want to be honest with you. The next few days are going to be loud. Ethan is not a man who absorbs consequences quietly. He's going to push back through attorneys, through family contacts, possibly through whatever public narrative he can construct. I need you to be prepared for that. Prepared how? Prepared by remembering that every move he makes now is a move made from zero leverage. Daniel's voice was steady and certain in a way that settled something in my chest. He has no legal access to your assets. He has no credible psychiatric evaluation. Holloway's report will be filed within the week, and it will be decisive. He has no clean record of conduct to point to. Everything he does from this point forward is noise, William. And noise cannot undo what has already been built. I looked out the window at Linda's bird feeder. A cardinal had landed on the edge of it, red as a warning, bright against the November gray. I've been building things for 40 years, I said quietly. I know the difference between a structure that holds and one that looks like it does. Exactly. Daniel exhaled. Go enjoy your sister's coffee. I'll call you when the next notification goes through. I hung up and sat in the quiet kitchen, with the November light coming through the window and Ethan's name sitting on my phone screen 4 times over. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel cruel. I felt the way I used to feel at the end of a job well done, not elated, but settled. The particular quiet of a man who has finished something he started and can account for every step of how he got there. My phone buzzed again. A 5th call from Ethan. I watched it ring. I watched it stop. I picked up my coffee cup with my left hand, the right one still splinted and healing, and I drank it while it was still warm. 3 days after the notifications went out, Ethan's countersuit landed on Daniel's desk. Daniel called me at Linda's house that Tuesday evening and read me the title of the filing over the phone, Carter v. Brooks and Carter Petition for Relief from Undue Influence and Elder Exploitation. I asked him to repeat it. He did. He's suing you, I said. He's suing me, and he's naming Linda as a co-respondent. Daniel's voice was controlled, but beneath the control there was something I had not heard from him before, a thin, bright edge of genuine indignation. The filing alleges that I used my position as your longtime attorney to manipulate you into signing documents that diverted assets away from your natural heir, and that Linda systematically isolated you from your son to facilitate that manipulation. He paused. It's 47 pages. It has a table of contents. A table of contents, I repeated. Someone spent real money on this filing, William. It's professionally drafted. The language is careful, the structure is competent. A brief pause. And it would have worked beautifully against a version of you that had no evidence, no documented trust structure, and no camera footage. I sat in Linda's living room, with the phone pressed to my ear, and looked at the framed photographs on her mantelpiece, her late husband, her 2 daughters, a picture of the 4 of us at Christmas the year before Margaret died. I felt something move through me that wasn't quite anger. It was heavier than anger. It was the grief of a man who had once held his son at 3 a.m. because the boy had a fever and now was reading about himself in a 47-page legal document with a table of contents. Linda. I called toward the kitchen. Come in here. She appeared in the doorway with a dish towel still in her hands, read my face in approximately 1 second, and sat down on the arm of the couch. He filed, she said. Not a question. He named you as co-respondent, Linda's jaw set. Her eyes went flat and hard in the way of a person whose patience has finally definitively run out. Of course he did, she said, her voice low and controlled and furious underneath. Of course. Daniel, I said into the phone, tell me exactly what we need to do. 3 things, he said. First, your affidavit. A sworn, notarized statement in your own words describing the timeline of events from the first visit at the hospital through the signing of the trust authorization. First-person chronological specific. Your own words, not mine. His voice was brisk and certain, the voice of a man who had been building toward this moment for 2 weeks. The affidavit establishes in your own testimony that every decision you made was made freely with full information and with complete awareness of its implications. It directly contradicts the undue influence claim. I can do that tonight, I said. Good. Second Holloway's report. I received the final version this morning. 14 pages. Something in his voice shifted, the indignation giving way to something warmer. She describes you, William, as demonstrating, and I am reading directly, exceptional cognitive clarity, sophisticated financial literacy, and a consistent decision-making pattern indicative of a person in full command of their faculties. She recommends the petition for guardianship be dismissed with prejudice. Linda made a sound beside me, a short breath of relief that she turned into a laugh, fierce and bright. She pressed her hand over her eyes for a moment, shoulders shaking, and I couldn't tell if she was laughing or crying, and I suspected she couldn't either. With prejudice, I said, meaning it can't be refiled. Meaning it cannot be refiled. Ethan cannot bring another competency petition against you. That avenue is closed permanently. Daniel paused to let that land. Third thing, the recording Linda made. The bar complaint threat, the undue influence threat against her. Under North Carolina law, a credible threat made against a witness or a party's legal counsel for the purpose of influencing ongoing proceedings constitutes obstruction of justice. The recording is admissible because Linda was a party to the conversation. NC is a one-party consent state. I'm attaching it to our response filing as Exhibit C. Linda already labeled it that herself, I said. A brief silence, and then Daniel laughed, a real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that surprised him as much as it surprised me. Of course she did. Linda looked at me from the arm of the couch, dish towel still in her hand, eyes still bright. What did he say? She asked. He said, of course you did, I told her. She smiled. Then a real smile, exhausted and relieved and fierce all at once. The smile of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for 8 months and could finally feel the weight beginning to shift. Daniel, I said, when we respond, when all of this goes before the judge, what does Ethan actually have left after Holloway's report, after the recording, after the footage? He has 47 pages of professional prose and 0 supporting evidence. Daniel's voice was quiet and certain. He has a psychiatric evaluation from a doctor he hired and paid, contradicted by an independent court-appointed judge with 22 years on the bench. He has an allegation of undue influence against an attorney with a 23-year clean record and a fully documented trust structure that predates any of this by 15 years. A pause. What he has, William, is a very expensive way of demonstrating to the court exactly what kind of person he is. I pressed my left hand against my knee and felt my own heartbeat steady and unhurried. Write the affidavit tonight, Daniel said. I'll need it by Thursday morning. After that, we go to court. The morning of the hearing, I put on the same charcoal suit I had worn the day I signed the papers selling Carter Construction 5 years ago. It was the only suit I owned that felt like it belonged to a serious occasion rather than a performance of one. Linda drove me to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse on East Trade Street, and we didn't talk much in the car, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed saying had already been said across 2 weeks of kitchens and hospital rooms and phone calls at 6 in the morning. She dropped me at the entrance and squeezed my left hand before I got out. You already won, she said. Today is just the part where it becomes official. I walked in on my own 2 feet, which mattered more to me than I could have explained. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. A compact, serious room with wood paneling that had absorbed decades of difficult decisions. Daniel was already at the plaintiff's table when I arrived, his briefcase open, his reading glasses on, moving through documents with the focused efficiency of a man in his natural habitat. He looked up when I sat beside him and said simply, "Good morning. How's the wrist?" "Stiff," I said, "but functional." Ethan arrived 4 minutes later with his attorney, a sharp-featured man in his 50s named Gerald Marsh, who moved with the practiced confidence of someone who had won enough cases to believe winning was his default state. Ethan wore a dark suit and kept his eyes forward, not looking at me as he settled at the opposing table. His jaw was set. His shoulders were rigid. He looked like a man holding himself together with both hands. The Honorable Patricia Simmons presided, 62 years old, silver-haired, with the particular economy of the movement that comes from spending years ensuring a courtroom runs on her schedule rather than anyone else's. She called the hearing to order at 9 o'clock and asked both parties if they were ready to proceed. Gerald Marsh said yes with the smooth assurance of a man who hadn't yet understood what he was walking into. Daniel said yes with the quiet certainty of a man who had. Daniel called Sarah Mitchell first. She came to the stand in her nursing scrubs. She had come directly from an early shift, and she sat straight and looked at the judge rather than at Ethan. Her voice was steady, but her hands, folded on the railing in front of her, were pressed together tightly enough that the knuckles showed white. "Nurse Mitchell," Daniel said, "can you describe the events of the afternoon in question as you observed them?" "I stepped out of Mr. Carter's room at 2:10 to retrieve his scheduled medication from the dispensary on the same floor," she said. "Standard procedure. I was gone less than 4 minutes. When I returned, Mr. Ethan Carter was in the room and Mr. William Carter was holding his wrist." She paused. "Mr. Ethan Carter immediately told me before I could ask any questions that he had just arrived and found his father injured. He asked where I had been. And what was the sequence of his statements? He said he didn't know what happened. He said he'd just walked in. He said I shouldn't have left the patient alone." Her voice tightened by 1 degree. "He said it very quickly, like the words were already prepared." Gerald Marsh objected to the characterization. Judge Simmons overruled without looking up from her notes. Daniel moved to the footage. The court's AV technician brought up the footage on the screen mounted at the front of the room. The timestamp showed 2:15. The angle from the upper corner of room 214 captured everything with the impartial clarity of a machine that had no interest in anyone's version of events. The courtroom watched. I watched too, even though I had already seen it, because I needed to see Ethan's face while it played. He was looking at the screen. His expression did not collapse. His expression did something more interesting. It went completely, utterly blank. The blankness of a man watching something he cannot argue with and has not yet decided how to survive. When it ended, Judge Simmons turned to look at Ethan directly. Her voice was level and precise, the voice of a woman who had learned long ago that volume was unnecessary when clarity was sufficient. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to what the court has just observed." Gerald Marsh put his hand on Ethan's arm. Ethan shook his head once, a small, tight motion, and said, "No response at this time, Your Honor." The words fell into the courtroom like stones into still water. Daniel then presented Margaret Holloway's report. All 14 pages entered into evidence, her findings read aloud by the clerk in the flat, official cadence of the court record. Exceptional cognitive clarity, sophisticated financial literacy, full command of faculties, petition for guardianship recommended for dismissal with prejudice. Gerald Marsh's cross-examination of Daniel was thorough and professional and produced nothing useful. Every document Daniel cited existed. Every date corresponded. Every financial record Ray Tuttle had analyzed held up under the attorney's scrutiny because Ray Tuttle had spent 30 years as an IRS examiner and built his report to survive exactly this kind of pressure. By 11:30, Judge Simmons called a recess and said she would issue her ruling the following morning. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Daniel stood beside me while Linda went to find coffee. Ethan and Gerald Marsh were 20 feet away, Marsh speaking in low, rapid tones, while Ethan stood with his arms at his sides not responding, staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man whose internal accounting had just produced a number he wasn't prepared for. "He knows," I said quietly. "He's known since the footage played," Daniel said. "The question now is what he does with knowing." He looked at me. "Get some rest tonight, William. Tomorrow is the last day of this particular fight." I watched my son standing in the courthouse hallway, 43 years old, in an expensive suit that his creditors would soon have opinions about, staring at nothing. And I felt not victory, not relief, not grief. Something quieter than all of those. The feeling of a man who has finally stopped waiting for a version of his son that was never going to arrive. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early the next morning and sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside the courtroom with a paper cup of bad coffee and absolutely nothing on my mind. That was the strange part. After 2 weeks of relentless thinking, of running scenarios and weighing options and measuring every word before I said it, my mind had gone perfectly, mercifully quiet. I sat on that bench and looked at the marble floor and listened to the building fill up around me, and felt for the first time in a long time like a man with nothing left to prove. Daniel arrived at 8:45. He sat beside me, briefcase on his knee, and looked at the same patch of floor I'd been studying. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Like a man with nothing left to hide," I said. He nodded once, satisfied. "Good." Linda came at 10 to 9, slightly breathless from parking her coat still buttoned against the December cold. She sat on my other side and took my left hand in both of hers without a word, and the three of us sat together on that bench until the clerk opened the courtroom doors. Ethan was already inside when we entered. He sat at the opposing table beside Gerald Marsh, and this morning he looked different from yesterday. Not the rigid, controlled blankness of a man watching footage he couldn't dispute. He looked tired. Genuinely tired, in the way of someone who had spent the night alone with the arithmetic of their situation and found that no matter how many ways they ran the numbers, the total came out the same. Judge Simmons entered at 9 o'clock, precisely sat, arranged her papers, and looked at the room over the rims of her reading glasses. "I've reviewed the complete record in this matter," she said, her voice carrying the flat, unornamented authority of someone who had no interest in theater. "I'll be issuing my ruling this morning, and I'll be brief because the record is clear and my conclusions follow directly from it." She looked first at the guardianship petition. "The petition filed by Ethan Carter seeking appointment as guardian of William Carter is dismissed with prejudice. The evidence presented, including the independent evaluation conducted by guardian ad litem Margaret Holloway, establishes without ambiguity that William Carter is a person of full legal and cognitive capacity whose decisions regarding his own estate are his alone to make. This petition cannot be refiled." Gerald Marsh wrote something on his legal pad. Ethan's hands, flat on the table in front of him, did not move. "Regarding the counterfiling alleging undue influence by Daniel Brooks and elder exploitation by Linda Carter," Judge Simmons continued, "this court finds no evidentiary basis for either claim. The counterfiling is dismissed in its entirety. Costs are awarded to the respondents." That meant Ethan's legal fees for bringing the baseless countersuit would be assessed against him, another number added to the pile of numbers that were closing in around him from every direction. Finally, the judge said, and her voice shifted in a way that made the room go very still. This court is referring the matter of the injury sustained by William Carter on the date in question, as documented by security footage and medical records, to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office for review and potential criminal proceedings. This referral does not constitute a finding of guilt, but the court considers it its obligation to ensure the appropriate authorities have the opportunity to review the documented record. She set down her papers. This matter is concluded. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound filled the room and then disappeared. I sat for a moment without moving. Linda's grip on my arm tightened, not dramatically, just the steady, warm pressure of a hand that has been beside you for 65 years and knows when to hold on. Daniel was already gathering his documents with the methodical efficiency he brought to everything, but I noticed that his movements were slightly slower than usual, and he pressed his lips together in a way that meant something had moved him and he was managing it. When I finally stood and turned toward the door, Ethan was already on his feet. Gerald Marsh was at his side, speaking in a low, rapid voice, damage control, next steps options that were narrowing by the hour. Ethan was not looking at his attorney. He was looking at me. It lasted only a few seconds. His eyes found mine across the width of the courtroom, and what I saw in them was not the cold calculation of the man who had walked into room 214 with a leather portfolio and a plan. It was not the panicked rage of the man who had grabbed my wrist. What I saw was something I had not seen on my son's face since he was very young, a raw, undefended recognition that he had traveled a very long road and arrived somewhere he had not intended to be. I did not smile. I did not look away. I held his gaze for those few seconds, and then I turned and walked toward the door where Linda was waiting. In the hallway, Daniel shook my hand, a firm, sustained handshake, the kind between men who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. "It's done," he said simply. Linda tucked her arm through mine as we walked toward the exit, her shoulder against my arm, her breath making small clouds in the cold December air when we pushed through the doors. Outside, the sky was low and gray, and the city was doing what it always did, moving indifferent, unhurried by the enormous things that happened inside the buildings along its streets. "What now?" Linda asked. I thought about it for a moment, about the house I needed to find the trust that was quietly doing what it was built to do. The document still unsigned that Daniel and I had discussed, but not yet finalized. I thought about Sarah Mitchell getting her record back. I thought about what it felt like to walk out of a courthouse on my own 2 feet, with nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. "Now," I said, "I go home." She laughed, a real one, full and warm, the laugh she'd had since we were children, and squeezed my arm, and we walked to the car in the cold December morning. And for the first time in 43 years, the future felt like something that belonged entirely to me. The months after the verdict moved differently than the months before it. Slower in some ways, faster in others, the way time moves when the urgency has finally drained out of a situation. And what remains is just the ordinary, unhurried work of living with what happened. Daniel called me in February with the DA's update. Ethan had reached a plea agreement, no prison time, but a formal guilty finding on 1 count of felony elder abuse, 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory restitution of $412,000 to be paid over 5 years, and a permanent restraining order requiring that any contact with me go through attorneys. His company had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in January. The creditors would get pennies on the dollar. His employees had already found other positions. "How do you feel about the agreement?" Daniel asked. "You had the right to provide a victim impact statement." "I know," I said. "I chose not to." A pause. Can I ask why? I thought about it for a moment. Really thought about it the way you think about things when there's no longer any urgency pushing you toward a quick answer. Because I didn't want him to hear my voice in a courtroom and mistake it for something that still needed to be said between us. I told Daniel. Everything I had to say to Ethan, I said when I said no. Everything after that was just the law doing what the law does. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the most dignified thing I've heard in 30 years of practice." I didn't feel dignified. I felt tired in the clean, honest way of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has finally set it down and is noticing for the first time that his arms are sore. In April, I sat across from Daniel in his 14th floor office on Tryon Street, with the afternoon light coming through the windows and a cup of coffee going cold at my elbow. He placed a document in front of me, the amended trust, the final version, the one we had been building toward since the night I called him from the hospital. "Take your time," he said. I read it carefully. The assets were unchanged. The structure was unchanged. What had changed was the beneficiary designation, the name that would receive the trust's assets at the time of my death or upon my voluntary dissolution of the trust during my lifetime. Ethan's name was not on it. In its place, the Carter Family Protection Fund, a non-profit entity Daniel had helped me establish in March, structured to provide free legal assistance to elderly individuals facing financial exploitation by family members. The kind of help I had been lucky enough to already have. The kind of help most people in my situation never find. "Once you sign this," Daniel said, "it's final. The trust is already irrevocable. This amendment is the last piece." "I know," I said. Ethan could challenge it, but with his conviction on record and Holloway's findings already in evidence, no court would entertain it. "I know that too." I picked up the pen, my right hand, now the splint, finally gone, the wrist healed to a dull, occasional ache that the doctor said would fade by summer. "Daniel, do you think I'm doing the right thing?" He looked at me steadily. "I think you're doing the only thing that makes sense for who you are," he said. "You spent 40 years building something honest. This is the last brick." I pressed the pen to the paper. My hand was steady. I signed my name on the line, turned the page, signed again, and when I set the pen down, the office was very quiet, and the afternoon light was very still, and I felt something settle in my chest that I recognized after a moment as peace. Not the temporary relief of a crisis resolved, but the deeper, durable kind that comes from a life finally pointed in the direction you always meant for it to go. "It's done," Daniel said. "Yeah," I said. "It is." June came in quietly, the way good things often do. The dogwoods outside my new kitchen window had already bloomed and dropped their petals by the time I finished unpacking the last box, a small house on the east side of Charlotte, 2 bedrooms, a covered porch that caught the afternoon shade, and not a single corner that held a memory I hadn't chosen to bring with me. I had bought it in May. It was the first decision I made entirely for myself in longer than I could honestly remember. The Carter Family Protection Fund opened its doors on the second Friday of June. Daniel had found us a small office on Tryon Street, 3 blocks from his own building, a practical space with good light and room for 2 desks and a conference table where people could sit down with someone who would actually listen to them. We had partnered with 2 legal aid organizations and a social worker named Beverly, who had spent 15 years navigating elder care systems and knew exactly which doors needed pushing. I gave a short speech at the opening. I had written it out the night before and then set it aside and spoken from memory instead, because the written version sounded like a man explaining himself, and what I actually wanted to say was simpler than that. I built this fund because I was one of the lucky ones. I said, standing in front of maybe 30 people in that small, sunlit office. I had a lawyer who answered his phone at midnight. I had a sister who spent 8 months building a case before I even knew I needed one. I had a camera on a hospital wall that told the truth when I couldn't prove it myself. Most people who are sitting where I was sitting don't have any of those things. This fund is for them. Linda was in the front row. She pressed her fingers under her eyes very quickly, the way she does when she's decided not to cry, and her face hasn't gotten the message yet. Daniel stood near the back with his arms folded, and the expression on his face was the one he got when something had turned out exactly as it should. Quiet and certain and slightly surprised by his own satisfaction. After the speech, Sarah Mitchell found me near the coffee table. She was in street clothes off duty, which meant she had come on her own time. She looked different outside the hospital, less contained, more like a person, and less like a role. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "Congratulations." I shook it with my right hand, the healed one. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. And thank you for what you did in that courtroom. You didn't have to tell the truth as carefully as you did." She shook her head. "Yes, I did. That's just what telling the truth looks like." Her eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, but with the particular warmth of someone who has been through something difficult and come out of it with their integrity intact. "Are you well?" "I'm well," I said, and meant it completely. I drove home that evening, as the sun was going down behind the city, the sky doing something extravagant with orange and rose that I hadn't had time to notice in years. The new house was quiet when I walked in. I poured a glass of water, took it out to the porch, and sat in a chair that I had bought because I liked it and for no other reason. I thought about Ethan, briefly, honestly, without the weight I used to carry when I thought of him. He was in Raleigh now, working somewhere, beginning again in whatever way a person begins again after the life they built collapses around them. I hoped he found something real in it. I genuinely hoped that. But the hoping was no longer my job. My job for the first time in 43 years was simply to be here. I watched the last of the light leave the sky. I finished my water. I went inside and made dinner and ate it at my own table in my own house. And the evening was very quiet, and I was not afraid of the quiet at all. I have told you this story, not because I am proud of what my family became, but because I believe someone watching this needs to hear it. I spent 43 years believing that providing for the people you love was the same as loving them. It is not. I gave my son everything except the one thing that would have actually helped him, the experience of earning something for himself, of failing and standing back up without my hand under his elbow. I thought I was building him. I was hollowing him out. Don't be like me. Don't wait until a hospital room and a broken bone teach you what a quiet conversation could have taught 30 years earlier. The people you love most deserve your honesty more than they deserve your money. I am not a religious man by habit, but the night I signed that final document in Daniel's office, I said a quiet thank you to God, not for winning, but for the clarity to finally see what mattered, and the time left to do something with it. If these family stories have taught me anything, it is this: a legacy is not what you leave in a bank account. It is what you build in a person. And if what you built in that person is only appetite, then the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to stop feeding it. These are the grandpa stories nobody plans to live, but more people are living them than anyone admits. If this story felt familiar to you, if you recognized someone in Ethan or in me, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs it. And if these grandpa stories have been worth your time, subscribing to this channel costs you nothing and means everything. These family stories are worth telling, and this family story, mine, is finally completely done. Thank you for staying until the end. The road was long, and I am glad you walked it with me. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements created purely for reflection and life lessons. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Step away and find something that fits you better. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.